Hey everybody, Don Georgievich here with Job Interview Tools. And if you have a behavioral interview coming up, I want to share with you my 5 bulletproof strategies for passing any behavioral interview. Now, in a behavioral interview, they're going to evaluate you based on the core competencies that are required for that job. I mean, basically, they're going to be asking you questions about how you would solve certain problems that are related to the job, and then you'll give them answers of how you solved similar problems in your last job. I mean, that's the essence of a behavioral interview. I mean, they're going to be using your past behavior as a predictor of your future behavior. I mean, if you know what you're talking about, you'll do well. And if you don't, then the interview will probably be a little bit more challenging for you. But don't worry, I'm going to show you how to get there. So, what happens when you're not prepared for a behavioral interview? Well, a lot of candidates, they like to show up thinking that they're just going to wing it. And they're just going to walk in there and they're just going to sit down and they're just going to start answering questions, right off the top of their head. And then all of a sudden, they get hit with these behavioral questions and they freeze up and they end up just giving a bad interview performance. I mean, perhaps you've even been there before. I don't know. I think we all have. But I mean, they might even know what they're talking about. But you see, the stress of the interview instantly overwhelms them. And then, employers don't get to see their best side. I mean, perhaps you've been in a situation before where you knew you were the best candidate, but you just couldn't get it out to show them. So, but we're not going to let that happen to you today. So let's dive right in and let me break down behavioral questions for you and so you can give better answers. Now, behavioral questions, they're best answered using the STAR formula, which stands for situation or task, action, and result. And behavioral questions usually start off with, tell me about a time when someone on your team didn't do his job, or give me an example of a time when, you had to, fill in the blank. It's that type of questioning that makes it behavioral. So whenever you hear a question in your interview framed like that, you want to answer it using the STAR method. So to do that, the first thing you want to do is describe a situation or a task, not both. It's one or the other. Some people miss this and they describe both a situation and a task, which is actually redundant. So don't do that. It's one or the other. So if they ask you, can you tell me about a time when you disagreed with your boss? I mean, you would start by describing a similar situation. And you might even say, well, my general approach for dealing with disagreements is to address them up front and try to understand what's driving the other side by separating the problem from the person. For example, always use for example when you're giving your answer in a behavioral interview. So, for example, when I was the finance manager at J&K Manufacturing, my boss and I disagreed over the handling of a surprise $150,000 invoice from our manufacturing partner. The partner had performed product development work outside the scope of our contract without prior approval, and they billed us for it. I mean, I wanted to dispute the invoice. However, my boss was willing to let it go. My boss had a conflict of interest because of his close friendship with their CEO. So that's the situation part. You've described it. You've set up your answer. The next thing you want to do is describe the action. Tell them what you did. So that might go like this. So I realized this was a process issue that was avoidable in the future. So I asked my boss to let me take over this vendor relationship and to manage all future dealings directly with their CFO. And he finally agreed. And, that way, there'd be no hurt feelings because, I was in charge and, it's not like he was in charge anymore. So he agreed, especially because we really needed to optimize our cash flow. So now you've just described the action of what you did to solve the problem. Then the next thing you want to do is wrap it up with the result and you explain what happened. And that might go like this. So I developed a direct line of communication with their CFO and we agreed to streamline the billing process by requiring an approved PO with every invoice going forward. Furthermore, I negotiated a 50% discount with their CFO on that particular invoice and we met them halfway, and that way there's no hard feelings and there'll be no more surprise invoices. And that's really all there is to answering a behavioral question. But the key is to frame your answer in the context of the job that you're interviewing for. And what I mean by that is you want to keep your stories relevant to the job. I mean, for example, if you were sharing stories from your job as a real estate agent, while you're interviewing for an accounting job at Citibank, then your stories won't carry as much weight. You want to use stories that are relevant to, accounting and banking and stuff, or whatever the job is about. But most important, when you're giving your answers, stick to the basics. I mean, keep your answers short and on point, and just briefly talk about the situation that you're going to explain, and briefly talk about the action, and then just simply summarize it up with a result. But you see, if you babble on endlessly and you tell this super long story, that goes on for like 5 minutes, they're not going to be able to follow you. So keep it short. But if they want to know more about what happened in your story, then you can go into greater detail. You might even say, what part of the story do you want to hear more about? You want to hear more about how I solved the problem, or, what the situation was, whatever it is. But all in all, I mean, your answer shouldn't be any longer than 60 to 90 seconds. If you go more than that, you're going to bore them to tears. Or even if it is a good, engaging story, there still might be a disconnect in the interview, because they just might be, looking at their phone, looking at their notes or whatever. So keep it short and on point. That way the full value of your story and your experiences, they'll get to hear that. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Now, the last thing that you should do before you walk into your interview is review your past work experience and projects that you've worked on over the past 5 to 10 years. I mean, get these fresh in your mind. You see, you have all these projects and all this experience, everything that you've done, it's all stored in your long-term memory. And when you sit down in front of an interviewer and they start asking you questions about things that you did a year or two ago or whatever, it's going to be a lot harder for you to remember all those things in any kind of sequence, because they're stored in your long-term memory. And your long-term memory is just a mess, and it's very fragmented of how it stores things. And this is where most people get confused. They get tongue-tied because they start trying to remember everything that they did, years ago. And then they're trying to sort all of that out in the interview, and it just turns into a big mess, and they get tongue-tied and they just don't know what to say. So if you'll just take a little bit of time to refresh the projects that you worked on. I mean, and only just refresh projects in your mind that are relevant to this job. And then also rewrite what you did and how you did it and some of the things that you experienced. And do this, get some paper and just, write on there in detail what you did, how you did it, when you did it. And this is going to take all those long-term projects and experiences that you have and move them to your short-term memory. And when you're in the interview, it's going to be a lot easier for you to remember what you did, because it's in your short-term memory, and you'll be able to quickly answer questions about all of your past experiences in a very succinct manner. Trust me on this one. It really works. I mean, do this and I guarantee that you're going to give answers that are going to be strong. They're going to be on point, and they're going to have structure to them. And, your interviewers are going to be able to comprehend them. All right, my friend, that is all that I have for you today. I wish you the very best in your next interview. But hey, before you go, head on over to jobinterviewtools.com/top10. Put in your name and email address. And tell me where to send this book to you, and I'll get it right out. This has the top 10 most common interview questions in it, and it's going to show you how to structure your answers to some of the questions, like tell me about yourself, why do you want to work here, what are your weaknesses, what are your strengths, and it's going to help you build a stronger answer foundation, so that when you're in the interview, you're going to be able to give more succinct answers that are what employers are looking for. Instead of giving those long, drawn-out, long-winded answers, this book is going to help you give more shorter, on-point answers. And that's all I have for you today. I wish you the very best in your next behavioral interview. I know you're going to do great. And if you want to get notified every time I release a brand new video, please subscribe to my channel and I'll let you know. And please give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. If you really feel that it helped you understand what behavioral interviews are and gave you that structure for building your answers, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. And that's it. I wish you all the best in your next interview, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.